My name is Crain. I'm going to talk a little bit about the staking economy today. So a few things about myself. So I've been working in crypto for about 11 years, and I've been involved in the Cosmos ecosystem for a long time. 2017, I was COO of Tendermint, sort of when it all got started. I was also on the board of the Interchain Foundation for a long time, and started Course One in 2018. And aside from that, I've been a podcast co-host for a long time. We now have the longest running crypto podcast, which started around 10.5 years ago. About Course One. So, we're one of the leading providers of staking infrastructure. We're also one of the first. So we started when Cosmos started, basically, or before Cosmos started, in 2018. And back then there was this kind of staking competition called Game of Stakes. Maybe some have been from the start remember this. And we got started there, and actually quite a few of the largest staking companies today also got started there. And we cover lots of different networks today, around 60 different networks, I think. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. Aside from running staking infrastructure, we also do a few other things. We do a lot of investments. So we have done around 75 different investments to date. Actually, quite a lot of them have been in the Cosmos ecosystem. And we're very much of a research-driven company. So we have a large research team, and we do a lot of research sort of on the cutting edge of proof of stake, interoperability, MEV, and a bunch of related topics. So proof of stake, right? So I'm going to be very brief here, right? Because I think you guys are all pretty familiar with it, right? Proof of stake was basically just the insight that you can use a staking asset to secure decentralized networks, and that you can basically sort of delegate this work to some party that's going to do it on your behalf, and then this capital is there at risk to sort of guarantee the right behavior, and if it's done well, to earn rewards on that. I think this is pretty interesting. If you look sort of at the comparison between proof of work and the proof of stake economy, right? We see on the left, left side from your end, you see that proof of work is still quite a lot bigger, right? It's around twice the size of the proof of stake, But almost all of that is Bitcoin, right? So if you actually take away Bitcoin, there's almost no proof of work chains. Or if you go from the top 10 assets, 8 of the 10 are proof of stake assets, or they're proof of stake secured assets. So for example, stable coins like USDC, USDT today are, USDT originally was issued mostly on Bitcoin. Today it's mostly issued on proof of stake chains. So we really have a vast majority of crypto assets today, at least in terms of the number of assets, are secured by proof of stake chains. And of course that even applies to the layer 2s, which generally have some kind of security assumptions that still rely on proof of stake chains underneath. Now, of course, maybe we will have, maybe it was also interesting here is right, even with Bitcoin, right, where there's now a lot of activity with these Bitcoin layer 2s, a lot of them are not really layer 2s in the sense of Ethereum, but they're more kind of proof of stake sidechains of Bitcoin. So we've really found that proof of stake has become the predominant way that we secure blockchain networks. And it's also interesting to think about this from the point of efficiency. And you can think of efficiency in a few different ways. So if you look at it in terms of capital, right? So Bitcoin has a market cap of 1.1 trillion, and the daily mining revenues are around 30 million. And so that works out to around 11 billion a year. And of course, that is money that's going to buying hardware, like my ASICs, and it goes to energy, and it goes to the profits of these mining companies, but it's basically all a dilution as a Bitcoin holder, right? Where I own in the end that much less proportionally of the Bitcoin supply. Proof of stake has around 230 billion staked, and the staking rewards in total actually are roughly the same as Bitcoin. So we see that it secures around half as much assets, pays around the same amount of rewards, But of course, there's a very big difference because most of the rewards, they go back to the asset holders. So they're not a dilution, right? So of course, I'm sure all of you, or many of you are staking some kind of assets and you're getting more assets, right? So you're not getting diluted. And if you take a sort of average commission rate of maybe 5%, then you end up having something like 500 million that actually gets paid to the entities, the validators, who are processing the transaction, secure the network, doing all that work. So if you compare that, sort of see like how much are the networks spending in money compared to the value they're securing, you can see that proof of stake is a lot more efficient than proof of work. So it's roughly 10 times more efficient today. And of course, it will be interesting to see how that evolves in the future. I wouldn't be surprised if that relationship is going to get even more extreme and we're going to see even larger, even more efficient security being provided by proof of stake. And maybe restaking is also one thing that's going to come in here and play a role. And of course, we all are familiar with the energy efficiency aspect here as well, where I think when Ethereum switched from proof of work to proof of stake, the energy consumption of the network went down by 99.9%. So it's like an enormous difference on that side. Another thing that's interesting about, I think, proof of work versus proof of stake, right? If you look at proof of work, then you basically have like the mining industry, which is completely segregated, right, from the rest of the sort of even Bitcoin industry. Like most people, they don't interface with this at all. This is very different from the proof of stake industry, which is really deeply interwoven into all kinds of facets of crypto. As retail users, right, you're staking crypto. We have exchanges, right? We have wallets, we have different institutions, ETFs, all kinds of different entities. Anyone who basically holds the asset becomes a participant in the system. And we work with like kind of companies, entities, or individuals across this entire spectrum. So I think it's also something that's interesting and shows you sort of like the diversity and how deeply interwoven in all of crypto proof of stake has become. So if you look at sort of the size of the staking economy, right? So we have around 230 billion that's staked. Today it's around 43% it's happening through liquid staking. So it's around 18%. And if you look at where do the staking rewards come from, you see the vast majority of rewards come from inflation. So that's basically the networks printing new tokens to pay for staking rewards. But I think at this point a bit more than a quarter does come from other sources. And the other sources basically fall, there's a few things that fall into. The biggest one is gas fees, right? It's just people paying for transaction fees. And the vast majority of those gas fees happening on Ethereum, right? Where basically, once we start having enough demand, then the prices go up and then we see a lot of revenues there. MEV is also, a significant factor. And I think MEV is also a lot on Ethereum, although I think there's also starting to be pretty substantial MEV on Solana. I'm actually not 100% sure if these numbers are completely correct, but I was at a dinner with some people building Solana DEXs, and they were telling me that the estimate that there's around 1 million a day in MEV on Solana also happening. And then there are some other things. I think one of these other things that is in there is actually DYDX, which is an interesting example because it's one of the only chains where it's a sort of like app chain where it gets the revenues from the actual usage of the protocol, right? Where people paying trading fees and those go to the stakers, and where you don't have any inflation of the native token, the DYDX token, and where also the fees are paid in USDC. So it's kind of interesting. You can, stake DYDX and then you get USDC, and it's coming purely from the usage of the protocol. Now, this kind of goes into the point before a little bit, but proof of stake is very diverse, right? We have a lot of different solutions for different networks. And they also mean that the kind of staking products end up looking very different. Of course, in Ethereum, right, we don't have in-protocol delegations. We have 32 ETH for every validator, although this is something they're also thinking of changing in Ethereum, where basically there could be an increasing balance and maybe a validator could have up to 3,000 ETH or something like that. So they are thinking of changing that because the downsides of having such a large number of validators. But that's kind of one staking model. But another staking model that I think is widely used, right, is the thing that we kind of know in Cosmos, right, where we have a limited validator set and we have in-protocol delegation, and different validators can have different types of voting power based on how much staked with them. And it's kind of very easy to use it. And we have Solana, Sui, Aptos, all the Cosmos chains, many different chains that are using this model. And then you have a whole bunch of different products, right? You have delegation. We run white label nodes for various different customers. There's liquid staking products, and we also have been working a lot on. We have a sort of very advanced Ethereum staking product. And on Ethereum staking is I think also where we're seeing the most evolution. And I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about it right after this. But so looking at liquid staking a little bit. So liquid staking is really very, very Ethereum focused, right? And I think it's primarily, the reason for this is primarily the thing I had before around the staking model Ethereum chose, right? Where basically Ethereum said, okay, you have to have 32 ETH and to stake, and then you have to spin up different validators. There's no in-protocol delegation. So that made the user experience really bad, right? For an individual who wants to stake ETH. People don't want to go and run their own validator. And this was even more so the case when Ethereum staking launched, because there was no withdrawals, right? So you could stake, but you couldn't unstake. And so that's where Lido came in. We were also very involved in Lido, and we were one of the original validators and DAO members, and became very dominant, right? And so today we have around 40% that's being liquid staked on Ethereum. On other chains, because they generally have this delegation model, it's just so much easier to stake on your own. So the kind of user experience benefit and a lot of the benefits that liquid staking brings you on Ethereum, you don't have on other chains. And so as a result, we have way, way less staked. Even on a chain that's pretty mature and has a lot of like DeFi activity like Solana, you have only around 6% or something of the SOL is being liquid staked. And most people just stake directly because most people, they're happy to stake and to sort of stay with that. I think one thing that's still a bit out in the open, and I think tomorrow actually, I was originally supposed to moderate this panel tomorrow about liquid staking, and I think this was going to be the topic of this panel, but I'm leaving so I can't do it, which is, is liquid staking a winner-take-all market? And I think that's, interesting question, right? On Ethereum, Lido is very dominant, although that dominance has been decreasing. I think especially with restaking, with different points, people shifting the tokens around to get more yield, we've seen that Lido has gone down a bit. In the long run, TBD. On other chains, Solana, for example, we have Gton, Marinade, both pretty big. So it's, Cosmos as well, right? We have Stride, which is so far pretty dominant. But, we have new companies also coming in, new protocols like Drop, for example, which is launching soon. Certainly it's the case that when it comes to DeFi integration, it's easier if you have like a single liquid staking asset. But, again, I think it's going to be very interesting to watch sort of how this plays out. So yeah, maybe we can talk about like MEV a little bit, right? So MEV is basically refers to the ability of the validator or block producer, right? So I think it gets a little bit complicated, especially when you talk about Ethereum. But of the validator to determine what kind of transactions to put in a block and to determine the order. So now if there's an arbitrage opportunity on the exchange, someone, let's say some token is trading at one price, but on another exchange on the same chance is trading at a different price, someone can execute a transaction, sell it high, buy it low, make some money. and then whoever gets that transaction in, can benefit from it. And of course, that opens the possibility for whoever controls the construction of the block to say, hey, I'm going to put my own transaction in, or I'm going to somehow capture the value that's implicit here. So I think this was recognized, quite a while ago in a research paper by these people who later founded Flashbots. And Flashbots then became this software on Ethereum where they basically said, okay, the best way to keep Ethereum decentralized is if we create an auction system where sort of anybody can come in and bid and sort of buy these opportunities at the highest price. So that's kind of the path that Ethereum took. Now, since then, or at a later point, Ethereum created this thing called proposer-builder separation. Maybe it's worth talking a little bit about that. Right? In most chains, basically, the validators, they create the blocks as well. Right? But in Ethereum, they've decided to kind of split this up and to have block builders who are the ones who get all the transactions, put them together, build a block, and then sort of send it to the network. There's another party called relayers that basically get the blocks and send them to all the validators, but they don't do as much. And then the validator takes whatever block sort of pays the most, and they create the thing, or they include it in the blockchain. So that's kind of where Ethereum is at. A lot of people not super aware of this. Actually, the block building side has become very, very centralized. So there's just 3 parties on Ethereum today that produce 93% of all the blocks. And what's also interesting is that 2 of those parties are actually trading companies themselves. So they are the ones, running arbitrage systems, trading on Binance, and then, creating the most profitable blocks. One other one is called Gattaca, and they have a block builder called Titan. We invested in that company. So they are sort of taking a neutral approach where they say, hey, we don't trade as well, and we kind of, the different trading companies can connect with them and send them the transaction. Although they can send it to other ones too, but because they don't trade against the one, they're sort of not competing with all the market makers. It's maybe more attractive to send it to them than to send it to, let's say, Wintermute. Who are running one of the other main block builders, because they may end up sort of trading against you. But so it's pretty interesting how that played out, and I think there's a lot of movement there still. I actually did a podcast with Vitalik like 2 days ago or yesterday, and asked him this question if he thinks this was a mistake, the whole proposer-builder separation, and I, sort of more or less said he does think it is. That the path they went down is not so ideal, and that Ethereum ended up in a really centralized place when it comes to block production. And I think, there's for example, maybe some people have heard of a new thing in Ethereum called pre-confirmations, where they are again trying to change this up and trying to basically bring back more of the power of deciding what transactions go into a block to the validators, by basically being able to sort of pre-sell, the guarantee that I'm going to include some transaction when the block comes up. So Ethereum has become extremely complicated when it comes to the entire, this entire process of how the blocks are created. And I think they're on a good path to make it even more complicated in the future. So yeah, you see a little bit of this flow here on Ethereum. And now we have also, I think you can see here, we have actually spent a lot of time at Chorus One. We have a big research effort around MEV and around sort of optimizing the rewards that a validator can produce by leveraging some of these things. So we run a modified version of Ethereum client called Adagio that basically tries to change it basically tries to delay when it receives blocks from the relayers, because later in the time of the sort of, as if you have like 16 seconds or a certain amount of time when the blocks can be received, if you wait longer, they generally get more valuable, because there's more time has passed, there can be more transactions, and probably the divergence between the prices on the main chain and the Binance or something like that, it will go up, will go wider with time. So if you wait longer, there's more arbitrage opportunities. The block become more valuable. So we have spent a lot of time kind of trying to optimize this and how you get blocks from the different parties. And so we make around, you know, since launch around 9% more MEV than sort of normal validators using this. But yeah, so that's kind of Ethereum. I think what's been interesting to see is that other blockchains mostly have not gone down the same route that Ethereum has gone down. And generally there you have still much more the case that the validators actually create the blocks. And they are actually responsible for, you know, ordering the transaction, deciding what goes into it. Maybe this is also because there's not as much money at stake, so maybe not as much incentive to change this. And actually, Cosmos chains have done some really interesting things as well when it comes to dealing with MEV. So an example is Osmosis, right? Osmosis has worked with Skip, so the company Skip, and they have built a sort of in-protocol MEV capture, right? Where they basically auction off the MEV, the chain itself, and then the revenues from that, they go to the community pool, or they're paid to the community pool of the stakers. I think it's a community pool. But basically, in the end, go back to the token holders. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Another example of a Cosmos chain that's done something kind of new and different here is DYDX. And we worked a lot with them. So we did a kind of research paper for DYDX before their launch of V4 in like how could they handle MEV on DYDX chain. Because of course, MEV is, from a user perspective, is not a great experience often, right? If you get sandwiched, it basically means you get a worse price and you sort of get a bit ripped off. And as an exchange, you don't want that. So what they came up with is basically this sort of have a rule and say, hey, as a validator, you're not allowed to do this. You need to process your transactions in the order received. You can't like insert your own transaction, change the order of transactions. Now, of course, how do you enforce that? Because you don't know in which order validators receive transactions. But actually, the other validators can have some view on whether they received it. It's like if all the other validators saw them in one order, but the one who produced the block saw them in a different order, then probably they did something funny. So basically, that's what DYDX is doing, is where they say we take sort of probabilistic methods and we say, hey, we're going to kind of say, hey, if there's too much of a deviance from a block producer from what everyone else has seen, then maybe they have done that, and then they could have a slashing of validators. So I think that's pretty effective deterrent, right? Because nobody wants that, you know, also reputational risk. If you did that, it would be pretty bad. But I don't think that's going to be probably the long-term approach. I mean, there's many other approaches to MEV, right? Some people want to encrypt the transactions, only decrypt it later. So I think it's an interesting area with a lot of innovation. In Solana, I think it's the other blockchain where we're starting to see a lot of MEV, different approaches to MEV and different innovations there. So if anyone's interested, we've published a bunch of papers on this stuff as well. So you can check that out, or you can go to our blog on the website too, where we link a lot of that. So now another area that I think is the hot area when it comes to staking, certainly in the last 6 months or so, is restaking. And actually, again, this is an idea that probably the Cosmos ecosystem did a lot to pioneer in some ways. But the observation is very simple, right? If you take Cosmos Hub as an example, if you stake 100 atoms, even if this validator double signed, the slashing penalty is at most 5%, so 5 atoms. So 95 of those atoms, they're really never at risk. They're sort of locked up, but they're not really serving as economic security for the chain. So of course it's like an obvious thing of, hey, but can you maybe use this money, multiple times or in different ways? And then there's different ways to do it, right? The Cosmos Hub has sort of gone down this road of interchain security and now, replicated security and mesh security. So there's a whole bunch of different kind of versions that are coming there or, in production already when it comes to interchain security. And of course, another possibility is if you have liquid staking asset, again, let's say you have like staked Atom from Stride, then you could use those staked atoms maybe somewhere else. And in Ethereum, this has become an area of a huge amount of activity. So basically, Eigenlayer, right, is sort of the leading protocol there, and I think there's around $20 billion worth of Ether that people have sent to this Eigenlayer smart contract with the idea that then this ETH would be used to secure other blockchains or other kind of, AVS is, what does it stand for? Validated Services something. I'm not sure the A. But basically, mostly these are blockchains. Sometimes there can be sort of other types of services, not exactly chains. And those would then be secured not by their own staking tokens, but by Ether. And then, the Ether could potentially be slashed in the future. Right now, they don't have slashing yet. And so you have this kind of, new security mechanism there. And then as an as a Ethereum holder who is restaking, I could then earn, in addition to the normal ETH staking yield, I could then also earn maybe some coins from these different AVSs that I'm also securing. So that's sort of the Eigenlayer design. They also have gone down the route, which I think is a little bit problematic, that as somebody restaking, I'm restaking to an operator. So for example, I'm restaking to Chorus 1, and then Chorus 1 is choosing which networks to run, and you're sort of, just restaking for any network that the operator chooses to run. It's quite different from the normal model where, you choose which chain you want to stake on, right? And then you choose the validator. But you don't choose the validator first, and you secure all the chains that they run. So that's kind of, I don't think it's a very good design, that aspect. And I think there is, for example, another platform here called Symbiotic that actually one of the key team members was for many years at Chorus 1. And they're also getting a lot of traction. I think they also have around 1 billion now. And they are basically trying to, right now it's also people put in liquid staking assets like staked ETH. And then you will be able to stake them sort of for different networks and then choose the validator. So is a little bit more similar again to how it works in Cosmos, right? And what's also interesting with Symbiotic is that they see it as a sort of very generic and generalized staking protocol where you can restake any asset. So for example, probably many of you are aware of Ethereum, which is this stablecoin protocol. It's gotten lots of traction. So they are launching a Symbiotic chain. And what they are doing is that the staking token will be ENA, so their own token, and USDE, the stablecoin they issue. And then, of course, so you could basically use Symbiotic as sort of the staking part of a chain and have that all on Ethereum. So I think with restaking, we are going to see a lot of innovation around staking, a lot of new approaches. I think it's the very beginning. A lot of the designs people have today, they may end up being overhauled and changed, but it's very interesting. There's a lot of things happening there at the moment. And of course, there's a big risk here as well, because in the end, you're starting to reuse the same assets many different times in different places. And of course, you could have maybe that, there's some slashing somewhere else, and then now there's insufficient slashing on some other level, and some sort of, cascade of failure could happen, right? I guess a little bit like one saw in the financial crisis. back then. Yeah, and I mean another place also where restaking is coming up now is like Bitcoin, where it's really actually pretty similar to what's happening on Ethereum, right? Except the difference is that because Bitcoin doesn't have smart contracts, you can't really do the stuff on Bitcoin itself, or only to a very limited amount, but you have to often sort of bridge it to some other place. So Babylon, which is of course a Cosmos chain, is the leading project there, right? Where you can basically bridge the Bitcoin over to Babylon and then use it to secure other services through restaking. So I think that's another thing that's going to become very interesting, and it's going to give new opportunities for Bitcoin holders to use their Bitcoins and take on more risk, but also generate more returns. So yeah, I think I'm going to wrap up here because I'm going to skip the governance bit. But so that's a bunch of the things that are happening in staking, and I think it's going to be very interesting, especially restaking, because a lot of change and evolution is going to come to this industry. So thanks so much.